You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to dig deeper into some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Utah GOP Chair Rob Anderson and Crystal Young-Otterstrom, former Utah Democratic Party Treasurer. Great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
All right, during the week we saw the confirmation go through. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, now the newest member of the Supreme Court, a 52-48 vote. That's what I want to focus in on here, because that's a significant change from what we've seen in bipartisan efforts in the past. Has the process been forever changed? Crystal, let's start with you.
I don't know if the process has been forever changed. I think it does become difficult for future nominees if the Senate and the White House represent different parties. Certainly a lot of the conversations around this nomination changed things permanently. We had a lot of conversations about potential packing of the court in the future, which I don't think would ever happen. But certainly this conversation seems different than it has in the past. No
doubt about that. And we'll dig into some of those other points you brought up a little more. But first, let's bring you in, Rob. Has the process been forever changed?
Well, you know, it's interesting that Donald Trump, it's a rarity that you get 3 Supreme Court picks in one term. And so therefore it's allowed this partisan politic divide to get even further apart and force these votes to be more partisan. But all in all, I think as far as a Supreme Court pick, Amy was probably the most bipartisan of the 3 that have been confirmed during this first term of Trump. But it does look very partisan.
Couldn't you go back 4 years, though, and say that Merrick Garland was probably the best choice from a Democratic president that Republicans could have hoped for?
Well, I don't disagree with that, but they were pretty, Leader McConnell was pretty adamant up front that he was not going to approve anyone in the last year of Obama's presidency. So President Obama knew that going into the whole selection process. He probably picked somebody he thought could get through the process, and it was rejected by the Senate.
Okay, Crystal, I want to hit on one of the things you just brought up. Are we to the point now where the president and the Senate majority are going to have to be from the same party in order to be able to get a Supreme Court justice through?
I hope not. I mean, we have seen a Washington, D.C. that's less and less about consensus and working across the aisle, which is not how we do things here in Utah. We work across the aisle, we get things done here. And I hope that D.C. can get it figured out, but I think we are in a new place. I mean, there is only one federal judge vacancy, and that's the one left by this Supreme Court justice. Republicans have done a pretty impressive job of packing the courts. I did see a pretty interesting story in the New York Times recently that asked, will this have electoral consequences? This white whale that Republicans have been chasing over decades of the court is now done. And so what do they have now? So we'll see what happens long term.
Rob, do you see us being at a point where the president and the Senate majority are going to have to be from the same party just to fill a court seat?
Well, I hope not. The governance isn't written that way. So in the future, it could change back to where it would be a bipartisan effort to get confirmations to occur. But currently, what we've seen the last few years is absolutely partisan.
All right, Crystal, you brought up expanding the court. You said you don't think it's going to happen, but some high-level Democrats are calling for it, saying it should. Why do you say it won't?
Well, the last time it was tried was FDR in the 30s, and that was 70 years ago. And I think it didn't happen then. I don't think it's going to happen now.
Rob, you see any efforts, successful or not, to expand the court?
No, that question's been brought up quite a few times, and former Vice President Biden has not answered that, which I think if it was not on the table, he would have adamantly said, we're not interested in that. I don't plan on doing that. So I think there are a lot of things on the table that will be discussed depending on the outcome of the election.
Crystal, they have been asked that, both Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President, and Senator Kamala Harris. They do not answer that question. That does lead many to believe that they will try to do that if they're elected.
Well, I think Rob actually hit it on the nail there. If it was a real possibility, they maybe would give an answer either way. And I think it's not a real possibility, and it's really just kind of hot air being discussed.
Okay, let's move on to the race for the White House. Interesting transition there with you bringing up hot air. How do you see this playing out, not only across the country, but in the state of Utah? Rob, let's start with you on that one.
You know, I look at the polling that was incorrect in 16, and it's somewhat slanted the same way this year. And then I look at the indicators that we saw in 16 that I kind of focused on as more involved in politics at the time was the crowds. Trump can pack an audience like nobody's business. And you see that even President Obama, when he holds a rally, it's a pretty sparse attendance. So I'm going to go with President Trump winning re-election by a few more electoral votes than he had previously.
National polls do indicate that Joe Biden does have the lead, but as Rob points out, Crystal, we saw the same thing in 2016. How do you see this playing out?
I'm unsure. If you asked me a couple months ago, I would have said I think President Trump was going to win re-election, even though that pains me a little bit, just saying. But the polls are up. The polls were wrong in 2016, but we are seeing turnout in historic numbers in early voting among young voters who did not show up in 2016. We're seeing women show up in higher numbers. We're seeing BIPOC voters show up in higher numbers. And I think we might be surprised on November 3rd, but who knows?
Rob, I'd like to get your take on that, because we have seen a lot of early turnout, which does tend to benefit the Democratic candidate.
Well, absolutely.
When you take a look at what, and compare that to 2016, how does that chemistry change, if at all?
Well, absolutely. I think the early voter turnout is over double, isn't it? The turnout of 2016. I look at, and Utah is different than the rest of the country, but you know, mail-in balloting in Utah doubled the turnout in our voting and helped the participation. So I think it can only help the participation nationwide. And I think we need a lot more involvement. And I see it in Utah, where the Pacific Islanders are more involved this year than I've ever seen, and I'm all for more involvement and more voice. If you're interested in the outcome in November, you need to get your ballot and vote.
So who takes the state of Utah?
Presidentially, President Trump takes it.
Crystal?
President Trump wins Utah.
Okay, so you see that as well. Around what figure?
I think I would guess 51%.
Okay, Rob?
65.
You think 65?
I do.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, if you take a look at Super Tuesday, a lot of Republicans, it appears, have come around to the president, because he got like 88% of the vote among the Republican Party on Super Tuesday, and that's a drastic difference from his primary performance in Utah in 2016. Okay, Utah's 4th congressional district, always one of the more heated races. How are you seeing this play out, Crystal?
I think Congressman Ben McAdams wins again. I know the polling's close, it's tight, it's going to come down again to maybe a few hundred votes, but I think he's going to increase his lead from last time.
Rob, your wife was a candidate for this position, trying to get the Republican nomination.
Right.
Burgess Owens came out on top. How are you handicapping this race?
Well, I think it's going to be close, too close to tell. If I had a crystal ball and decided to throw some money down on the table at Vegas, I'd give it a toss-up, and I wouldn't. But I think Ben McAdams wins by a very, very small margin. Hopefully the turnout's a little bit greater than it was, and the reason I think we lost that seat was voter turnout within the younger generation, the 25 to 35-year-olds in Utah County.
Speaking of money, a ton of money going into this race, a lot of it outside. Are you, the two of you, concerned at all about the impact that outside money is having on this race? We have a minute left, so I'll give each of you 30 seconds. Crystal?
I guess I'm not concerned, because this is how politics works, and it's been doing it this way a long time. I think that Utah voters are smart. I think that they're good at cutting through the noise. I think they recognize politicians who speak the Utah way, who work the Utah way, and Ben McAdams has proven that he works across the aisle. He doesn't vote along party lines. He represents his district, and I think his district will reward him accordingly. Okay,
Rob, you have the final word.
Yeah, I dislike outside money in politics, but that's how it's played these days. Does money equate to a win? statistically it does. And so outside money will always be a player in Utah politics, especially when it's a seat like the Congressional 4th District.
And we're looking at record spending in this 4th District race, by the way.
Absolutely.
Hey, great to have both of you on the show. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us.